Interlude 4. The Gates of Dar Lugal, East Surgirkar. 1st of Yaoyod, Imperial Year 4006. Horns, the deep and rumbling woods of Sholo-Shaidi rather than the brass of Old Gunug, shook the walls of Surgirkar's eastern edge. The High Marshal had come, and the battlements fluttered with the black and yellow of the Empire, rather than the blues and golds of the Kingdom of the Sun. The shattered gate which once had opened onto the gilded canal, and the frame about it, had been hauled away by army tractor and dig teams. And the single-piece steel bridge the engineers had slid into place during the night in the wake of the assault allowed Tlaloc and his conquering entourage to ride smooth atop their dark, hairless Shaishan stallions. He, and all those invited to ride in with him, had been fitted with destroyer plates sent up from the capital for the occasion, and their strange horses likewise were barded in dark metal trimmed in gold. The yellow and black plume of highland birds away south danced across their shoulders and upon the crested helms of their horses. Army photographers, sending their work away home to papers in the provinces of the Empire, snapped shots of them as they went. The knights of the old ages of iron or steel, still masters of the field even in the age of fume and powder. The dawn was, it seemed, coming at last out east. But in the remaining hour of night, their camera flashes lit the gloom and aided the electric and traditional torches of patrols leading the commanders of the host into the city. Those pockets of Surgirkar's residents who had surrendered had all, by now, been marched under guard out onto the eastern plain, bound by train for Tepeklan. The remainder had been slaughtered, often at great cost to Sholo-Shaidi, as they holed up in their sturdy earth and brick compounds. Still, there were likely stragglers hidden in this or that cellar or unfound chamber, but the dogs of war would sniff them out soon enough. And yet, despite this, Surgirkar remained abuzz, alive with patrolling soldiers in their deep army yellows. Brought in from reserve, these men were fresh-faced and unscarred, and their presence was allowing the legionaries who had struggled and bled so doggedly during the taking of the city their desperately needed rest. Field hospitals had cropped up in occupied temple or upon intact rooftops. Barracks were being made from old garrison houses or stables, and the beasts remaining in them butchered for fresh meat to feed the ragged soldiery of the Empire. Men in uniforms bloodied and muddied by the 30th's victorious fighting and sprinting lulled too drunk or exhausted to sleep in doorways, or crouched nursing pipes in shaded alleys, their embers and the soft gleam of their eyes in the dim moonlight betraying their presence. Chaplain war priests were branding the Empire's Triskelion upon the young palms of men who had spilt their first blood with hot iron, and their older comrades watched on and cheered their passage to manhood. Their Kandari auxiliaries, glutted on the meat of the foe, lay sprawled in camps surrounded by their fattened war beasts, turning garden and court into hide-strewn village. They sang and chanted their low-rolling drones of oral poetry and history over fires, and laughed shrill in the deep dark. Their Sholo-Shaishan comrades gave them a wide berth, for the wet smell of them carried far, and their snarling hyenas were not so full as to be pacified entirely. And yet High Marshal Tlaloc saw several knots of the hyena folk miming in wordless speech with wandering patrolmen, swapping bulging skins of their notoriously strong blood liquor for tobacco, which the riders sucked and swallowed raw as if it were food. Remains in their hundreds of thousands were being gathered upon the narrow streets, and carted by horse or snarling nyena out of the city. The Ug corpses were burning in the still muddy beds of the drained rivers Usal and Igtuku. The Lautani were being buried in improvised graves north of the city, along the saps the Sholoshaitians had dug for their approach to the outer wall. The dog folk were being carried off home for internment in the cenotes of their provinces, or else, if the deceased were of royal blood, mummified and set to watch in the undercities across the empire. 3 such princes, 2 of Teotihuacan and 1 of Tzonatlan, had been killed in the fighting. The king of Teotihuacan himself, wounded in the neck by shrapnel, who rode tired beside Tlaloc in the column, had seen his fallen sons off on the train east the evening before. The king of Tzonatlan, already having lost an eye during the breaking of the second wall, awaited his own son's body in recovery away south in the jungles of their homeland. There could be no accurate count of their dead as yet, but the conservative estimate posited by Tlaloc's aides of 250,000 would almost certainly be eclipsed. Many of their sons had gone to join Harakwe's ranks in purchase of this victory. Much as he was happy to have the jewel of the kingdom of traitors gripped tight in his hand, and much as he knew those now cold had died well, the High Marshal was again ashamed that he had not been here in person weathering the storm. But the orders of the Tlatoani were iron, and he had bent to them. He saw yet more foreigners after their slow ride across the city, as true sunrise crept up on them. A detachment of Minoan eklektos, the bullfolk's word for their own Ektal, if Tlaloc remembered correctly, from across the sea, who had been training with their Sholoshaitian counterparts in Teotihuacan at the time of the war's outbreak and immediately volunteered, was camped with a weathered legion of Teotihuacan Ektal upon the plaza in the shadow of the ziggurat centering the city. Many slept beneath the open sky, but those who could not were drinking some sweet-smelling anise drink from far Minoa together, and playing Minoan yoke lute or Sholoshaitian clay flute over fires built of Ug furniture. As the High Marshal dismounted, and a scattered few tired legionaries who had noticed his small contingent ride into the occupied square saluted both his and their king's arrival with branded palms aloft, he removed his helm and turned to King Tokayo of Teotihuacan and spoke for the first time since passing the walls. "They fought with your men in the north, Lord?" King Tokayo, likewise removing the suffocating helm, looked over at the bullfolk with pride. He was, like many from his province, of a skin so pale gray that it bordered on white, but Tlaloc supposed loss in the bleeding of the day before might well be accentuating that pallor. His dark eyes were shining when he looked back at the High Marshal. "They went in with the second waves," King Tokayo explained. "My legates say they fought very bravely in the upper city." "Invite their legate, or whoever remains highest in their command, to climb with us, then," the High Marshal told him. "The sons of Minoa deserve to be present when we go in." And so their hulking commander, who was introduced saluting to the High Marshal as Ageleos, joined the group. The High Marshal Tlaloc's contingent now consisted of nearly 20, and represented in it were all the kindreds of Sholoshaiti's dominion. In addition to Tlaloc himself and the king of Teotihuacan and a dozen other higher Sholoshaitian officers, there was the leering Boag, or chieftain, Coaba of Clan Anaasi, the largest Kandari tribe lent to the siege. She stood in the place of the Boag Bala, who was raiding in the west beyond recall. Captain Gerhard of Nordvind, who had commanded one of the zeppelins above the city, tall and iron gray in his rich oranges and dour blacks, represented the lupine Volvin. Legate Tewas of Estlan Province's Ektal 1st Legion, still limping after taking fragments from a grenade during the siege, stood for the Hurabaya Lautani. The strangest of all these was a nervous legionary and camp musician of the Tepeklan army legions, no more than 20 years old, who had been introduced to the High Marshal just hours earlier as McBlair, foxfolk by his kindred. The Sion youth from New Sholoshaidi's Appalachia territories had been studying in Tepeclan earlier in the year, and had left his musical pursuits to enlist upon the outbreak of war. McBlair had seen his first combat in the lower city. His palm was still bandaged in the aftermath of the Triskelion brand he had received just hours before. While the young Sion soldier had protested being invited, the High Marshal had assured him he would make as fine a representative of his kindred as any other. He was the sole surviving son of his people, still a rare sight in the Old World, on record with the legions, and Tlaloc had been glad to find him. And so the group of them scaled the bloodied steps, now cleared of the bodies of the slain, the High Marshal a few steps before, and the rest trailing close behind. Looking up into the brightening sky, and allowing the hint of a grin to creep into his expression, Tlaloc reached the peak of the stairs, and was saluted by the waiting guard of Ektal destroyers arrayed around the temple entryway. After returning their gesture and putting them at ease, he turned the attention of his retinue, now gathered about him, toward the eastern horizon over the smoking wreck of the old city. "It seems Gazorgu's light isn't gone for good," the High Marshal said. "He spared 3 days for his first king, but only 1 for Shamat the 12th. Perhaps already the traitor of the second brood weakens." The Lautani legate Tewas spat upon the lapis brickwork at their feet, glaring into the rising sun. But King Tokayo of Teoatlan, gazing with them, asked, "So you think the line is ended then?" "I cannot think how it would be otherwise," High Marshal Tlaloc sighed. "His prince died months ago in battle, and the pillar has gone out. Yesterday's failure of the sun to fully appear is yet more testimony. It is the first time such a thing has happened since the time of the founder. The lineage of their forever king is ended. The Tepec Ishko line of Ichtak I stands as the sole link the mortal kindreds have to the time of legends." Legate Tewas and many of the others present snapped to attention as the High Marshal said this, as if the Tlatoani himself were among them. The High Marshal turned to the now open gateway to the inner temple before them, dark save for the sweeping electric lights of Ektal guardsmen and the flickering glow of a few low braziers the men had relit upon gaining entry. The rubble which had kept the attackers at bay most of the day prior had been hauled away by the engineers and laborers. The High Marshal approached the group of plate-clad Ektal arrayed at the entrance, asking, "No men have reported any discomfort?" "The rubble ceased to burn at our touch yesterday, around sundown, or at least when sundown would have usually been, High Marshal," one of their number said. "We've swept the interior of the temple and the palace above, and cleared them of corpses. There were no live enemy fighters inside, and we have found no hides or tunnels. The sappers are still at work below. None of us are unaccounted for, and beyond the burns from yesterday, no one has suffered any injury or strangeness here." "Good," the High Marshal said. He nodded to his companions and followed the destroyers as they led the contingent inside. The towering ceiling and forest of Titan pillars had been marred little by the quake and collapse which had shielded the interior for nearly a full day. And now that whatever magics had rendered the seemingly mundane rubble scalding to the touch, and had melted the drills and picks and shovels of men who'd stricken it, was suddenly dissipated, the temple looked an empty shell. There had not been nearly enough dead inside to suggest a mass suicide among the besieged, much as that seemed in character for a pair of peoples prone to flinging their infants into fires or pools. They approached the font from which the Pillar of Dawn had sprung for 8,000 years, and gazed down upon a bed of smooth but unshaped obsidian stone, blank and featureless. "How did they get out, do you think?" It was King Tokayo who had asked the question. He was not the only one of their number who was nervous. All looked around, and the Ektal who'd swept the temple kept their weapons and wits close at hand. as if at any moment the teeming thousands of survivors who just night before last had cowered in this space would reappear from the shadows and attack. But none emerged, and the cold shadows about them remained lifeless and echoing with the booted footfalls of foreigners' tread. Who knows what witchcraft the servants of the two traitors are capable of, High Marshal Tlaloc said. All we can do is stay wary, and begin to plan for the future. King Tokayo nodded, motioning to the yawning chamber and its glum gold idols around them, asking, "It is to be made a provincial capital, yes?" "It is," Tlaloc told him, "though I do not know who will be placed upon the throne, or what name will be given to it. That is the Tlatoani's decision to make, and he will make it when he returns from his mission." The others were silent. Information was still vague about the aims and status of the Tlatoani, but despite the blockade maintained on news coming out of Milikatlan, it was evident to all at this point, even as far away as this foreign temple beyond the rivers, that something terrible had befallen the breadbasket of their empire. Tlaloc, who had only a shade more information than they, pressed on, not wishing to allow doubt to soil their moment of triumph. For there could be no doubt that Sholo Shaidi, for all its might and grandeur, had not achieved anything this worthy of awe in many centuries. I imagine Legate Ishpehualtia, may he fight well for Harakwe below, would have been the Tlatoani's choice had the legate survived the siege, Tlaloc told them. Ichtak VI was fond of him. Perhaps one of his comrades will be singled out, but it is also possible he will choose one of Lautani blood up from Estlan for the throne. It would be appropriate, I think, that the sons of the first traitor, having seen the way, be allowed to undo the damage the sons of the second traitor have done to this world, to work at settling and rebuilding this site of their maker's greatest misstep. They have proved themselves well suited to the task in Estlan. "What will be done with it, High Marshal?" Legate Tewas, who looked giddy at the prospect, was asking as he looked with no small measure of disgust upon the looming idols. His feline eyes glinted. "The temple, I mean." "It will be torn down brick by brick, I'm sure," Tlaloc said. "Its gold will be melted down and sent to the cradle for repurposing, as with the rest of the city. We will rebuild it in our own image, and raise here a temple to Harakwe and his kin, which will dwarf even this blasphemous mound. Even now bridges are being raised over the eastern rivers, and the Lion Folk rails are being reworked, and lines are being run to the cities which will one day house more than just our garrisons. Settlers will come from the provinces, a parcel for each who had a hand in the conquest, if they be willing to leave their home kingdoms. In 100 years' time, plan of the old general be respected, our peoples will be the ones reaping and mining these lands. The winter will creep back in, as it does elsewhere in the north, but that has not stopped us from taming Kushkotlan, or Teoatlan for that matter, as King Tokayo can attest. The name Gunug will be spoken only in sermon or lecture, as a memory of dark times long past, and we, here on the first day of Harakwe's month, as the homeland celebrates the old general's coming, stand at the start of that new age. After this war is won, he added in his head. As the others, emboldened, began to speak amongst themselves and wander the temple interior to see its gilding and engravings, the king of Teoatlan remained by the side of the High Marshal. Tlaloc's belief the perceptive Tokayo must sense some measure of his worry was confirmed when the man spoke, softly, so as not to allow his voice to carry in the vast cavern of the hall. Grieved as the monarch was after his own losses, and worried for the future of his line as he must be, it clearly had not stopped him from wondering beyond to the affairs of the wider empire. "Milikatlan," he said. Forgive me, High Marshal, I do not mean to overstep my station with you on the warpath, but I would ask what you know of it." "I know that it is gone, Lord," Tlaloc told him. "That much we all have guessed." "But you know for certain," King Tokayo said. "Yes," Tlaloc said. Tense quiet ruled the space between the two for a moment as they both stared down into the pit where once the life of Gunug had risen for the heavens. Then High Marshal Tlaloc, who, as ordered, had not confided in anyone during the siege, decided to say aloud what had only come to him. He supposed if he could not trust one of Sholo Shaidi's ruling provincial kings, there was no one he could trust, and the longer he kept it buried within him, the heavier it weighed on his already overstretched mind. "It is the Spider Folk, Lord," Tlaloc said. "We will be alerting the rulers of all the provinces directly now that the north is pacified and the worst is finished here. I think the Tlatoani knew it even before he left. That is why he took so many with him, and raised the scale of draft the moment he had crossed the border back home, in the old world and the new. It is also why I sent the king of Tzonatlan home to his province to recover, rather than allowing him to rest in the field with us. It is why I am rushing the legions from Tzonatlan home. The jungles there were once their home, you'll recall." King Tokayo did not denounce or interrogate at the re-emergence of monsters from old tales. He merely asked, "Is there reason to believe they will attack Tzonatlan?" "You know as much as I, so far as the situation below ground goes," Tlaloc said. "But the fact Ichtak VI marched into what remained of Milikatlan and then sent word back out that he was elevating me to regent in his stead implies to me he has received direct orders from him below. He has gone into the Underdeep with a legion he hand-picked for the journey, but he did not say where. The rest has been up to my judgment, with what facts I have available to me, and, right or wrong, I believe the soldiers of Tzonatlan would be best served in their homes. That is why we conducted this assault months early, before the traitorkin could be bled dry." King Tokayo asked the question in a tone which was hard to read, and the High Marshal looked his way, almost expecting anger. But there was no malice or even confusion in the once father's features. If anything, the man seemed almost relieved. "Precisely," Tlaloc said. "I was originally told autumn. I said to the legates and kings that it was a drive to bring the lion folk to their knees right on the eve of Harakwe's month, a thing of portent and history, and it has served that purpose. But now, once the Ugg West are driven from their last, much weaker holdings into the sea, we will be free to respond if foes assail us from beneath." King Tokayo nodded, seemingly satisfied. It had not, his stony yet grateful expression seemed to say, been for nothing. High Marshal Tlaloc straightened, saying, "Lord, I will see things wrapped up here. If you can take rest, seek lodging in one of the barracks your Ektal occupy in the upper city. I'm sure they will be glad of your company. Tomorrow we will get you on the trains home to be with your sons as they are put to their watch." King Tokayo nodded again, saying, "Thank you, High Marshal." And the king had meant it. Tlaloc watched the man walk from this profane temple of the Traitorkin and out into the air of a new day.